I was asked to babysit a neighbor's kid while they went to a party related to one of their jobs. I'd never, ever babysat for anyone before, so admittedly I was pretty nervous. But if I would have known what kind of night I had in store for me, I'd have turned the job down in a second. It was made all the worse by the fact that my parents pretty much assured me that it would be an easy $50 and that the night would be over before I knew it. I had a bad feeling about the whole thing from the start, but my dad actually managed to talk me out of that headspace. Now I wish I'd just trusted my gut and stayed well away. So I wander over to the house around 7 in the evening, introducing myself to the parents and the kid before they go over a few ground rules. At first it seemed like my dad was right, that I was just being silly and that, if I played my cards right, I could turn this into a regular earner to fund my weekend shopping habits. The parents were lovely, and so was the kid, so I got pretty chill pretty quickly and ended up sort of enjoying myself, entertaining the kid after they left with the help of Disney Plus, which I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a huge fan of. Anyway, everything is going well until it comes time to put the kid to bed. Then things start getting a little awkward. The kid straight up refuses, and our new happy little friendship starts to quickly deteriorate. I felt super mean having to lay down the law with the kid, and he went from crying and wailing to shouting and screaming at me that I wasn't his mom, he hated me, I didn't belong there, stuff like that. It actually kind of hurt, and I started to realize that maybe I wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility yet. To be a parent or a guardian, you need to be tough enough to be able to kind of like be the bad guy, if that makes any sense. And if there are any of you out there that are looking to get into babysitting, thinking it'll be an easy few bucks, please reconsider. I've done way easier things for money before and since, things that don't make you feel crappy for having to have shouted at a kid. But after a while, the whole temper tantrum seems to have tired the kid out, and even though he still seemed upset with me, he went up to his room, got into his pajamas, and climbed into bed to sleep. He asked me to read him a story, and since he'd actually done as he was told, I obliged, and when his eyes finally closed over and his breathing slowed, I snuck out of the room and downstairs to leave him to get some rest. So about an hour or so later, I was sitting on the couch texting a friend of mine, telling them how babysitting was way harder than I thought it was going to be. I'm working through the leftover chicken pot pie that my mom had given me to take over there, catching up on some episodes of The Mandalorian when the family house phone starts to ring. Thinking it was the parents looking to check up on me, I pick up, greeting the caller in the cheeriest voice I could manage, only no one on the other end responds. I say hello a few more times, assume it's a butt dial or a bad line, and hang up, heading back to finish off my pie. No sooner am I sat down again, the phone rings again. I was kind of expecting it, I suppose. Maybe the parents had gone through a tunnel or something. I get up again, head over to the phone and pick up. Only this time, when I do, I can hear breathing on the other end of the phone. I give another cheery hello, but there's just the same breathing coming from the other end. When the person finally speaks, it's this super deep voice, obviously a guy, telling me to check on the sleeping kid. I thought it might have been the kid's dad, but there was also something really weird and distorted about the voice too. I respond like, okay, I'll go check, and the line goes dead immediately. The kid is fine, sleeping like a rock, so as much as I'm kinda creeped out by the weird voice, I figure it must have been the dad. Maybe the parents had argued, I don't know. I tried not to think so much about it. But then, pretty much as soon as I'm back downstairs, the phone rings again. No caller ID, no nothing. So, I answer, unable to prevent this fear from entering my voice. Big mistake. Whoever is calling senses this and starts to giggle down the phone line in that same weirdly distorted voice. What they said next made my blood turn to ice. Gonna snatch him up. Gonna snatch up the kitty when you're not looking. Gonna get him. I went silent, just totally silent out of fear, and that's when I heard a creak in the floorboards above me. Someone was moving around in the rooms upstairs. I pretty much dropped the phone and bolt upstairs and into the kid's room to find that he's still asleep. Or rather, that he very much appears to be asleep. But that same deep, slow breathing isn't there. The more I look, the more he seems like he's almost holding his breath or something. Not only that, but his arm is at this weird angle that makes it look like he's holding onto something under his pillow, something he's trying to hide. In a fury, I pull the pillow up slightly, and then realize what's been happening. Whoever thought it was a good idea to buy an 8-year-old kid a phone is straight up crazy. But under that pillow wasn't just a phone. There was a voice distorter under there too. I grab both and run out of the room, back downstairs where the kid starts throwing another temper tantrum. I felt so dumb, completely played by the kid, made to feel terrified and vulnerable. How the hell could someone be so young, yet so goddamn malicious and mean-spirited? The parents arrived back shortly afterward, and I didn't mention a word of what happened until they'd paid me in full. Then I read them the riot act. I was never going to babysit for them, and they were completely irresponsible letting their kid have things like a phone, let alone an actual voice distorter. Turns out the creepy little gadget was their older college-age kids, and that the little guy was fascinated with it and wouldn't give it back to him. But I didn't care. I wasn't about to put myself out there like that ever again. The worst kid I ever babysat for was named Rory. This all took place about 14 years ago now, in a small town called Haddington, just outside of Edinburgh in Scotland. It's a nice place in general, but people there can be pretty, well, weird. I would have to volunteer myself for babysitting jobs in a small town like that, where suspicion and malice are rife, and there's a dark secret being hidden in almost every household there is. So anyway, I'd always been sort of aware of Rory's existence. I'd gone to school with his older brother Struan for a few years, who was a similarly creepy little person, but I'd never really encountered Rory on a personal level. That was all about to change. After I put the notice up in the local off-license that I was offering sitting services, I grew to dread it when my phone rang. I mean, it was mostly normal jobs, for normal families, but every so often I'd get a call, and I'd just know it was going to be a bad one. And when I got the call from Rory's mom, I knew it was going to be rough, but I couldn't just turn down the job. If you get a reputation for being flaky or unreliable, the phone calls and the money quickly dry up. So once the family had promised me my usual rate, the job was on. It seemed pretty simple. Friday night, 6 p.m. until 10 p.m., with money for a takeaway delivery included. I arrived a few minutes early, just to kind of get myself oriented in the house. It's super important to know where the basics are, but also where stuff like plasters and other first aid supplies are located just in case the kid has an accident. Rory's parents seemed pretty friendly, but the parents are always friendly when you're giving them a night off from parenting. But no matter how friendly and chirpy they were, you could kind of tell that they weren't exactly the most normal of families. So just before the parents leave for whatever event they were going to, they introduced me to Rory. And the moment I lean down to say hi, I can tell straight away he is not keen on the evening's proceedings. The first words out of his mouth are, "I don't like her." He looks at me, says nothing, then looks at his mom and dad and says straight up, "I don't like her." I just sort of laughed awkwardly while his parents reassured him that I was there to look after him, and that they'd be back before he knew it. But still, the way Laddie glared at me, scowled, then ran upstairs to his room before slamming the door. I'd be lying if I said that I hadn't faced that kind of hostility before, but it's also a huge buzz to win the kid over, to go from not wanting me there to not wanting me to leave. So Rory's parents leave, telling me he's got a microwavable meal in the fridge that I'm to heat up when he gets hungry. But I decide to employ my primary winning over tactic, walking to the bottom of the stairs and calling up, "Rory, I'm gonna order a pizza. You can have some if you want. Just come downstairs whenever you're ready." Now this usually has a shy, moody kid smiling and warming up to me, but not Rory. He didn't make so much as a peep. I mean, if I'm honest, there was a moment that I thought he might have, climbed out of his bedroom window or something. I'm serious. That never ever happens when you offer pizza. So I go up, creep towards his room, and I'm about to knock when the door swings open, and the little guy is stood there, fury in his eyes while he screeches, "Get away from my bedroom," before slamming the door in my face. It scared the absolute shit out of me, so I just went downstairs and hoped the night would be over as quickly as possible. So since Rory didn't want any pizza, I ordered an Indian instead. The delivery driver arrives, I get my food, and I'm sitting there eating it on the couch when I hear little footsteps coming down the stairs. Rory appears in the doorway, and I ask him if he's hungry yet. He doesn't say a thing, not for a good minute, so I just kind of smile and carry on eating my chicken korma. "Do you have a boyfriend?" he suddenly asks. I nearly spat a load of rice out, just like this involuntary awkward laughter rising up from my throat. I mean, I literally couldn't believe he'd just asked me something like that. Of all the questions to make a babysitter feel awkward as hell, this tops the list. I just reply like, "Yes, I do actually, he's lovely and he lives just around the corner." A lie, of course, I was painfully single at the time, but anything to deter the little brat. As expected, little Rory does not take this well, then sort of marches off into the kitchen. I suspect he's after his food, but I'd been given strict instructions not to let him mess around with the microwave or let him try to prepare any hot food. He wasn't quite tall enough to reach the countertop yet, and he was blatantly at risk of scalding himself with the hot food. Only when I follow him into the kitchen to politely tell him that I didn't mind making his food for him, I see him climbing onto a chair that he'd pushed towards a countertop. Just as I'm about to stop him, he pulls the biggest kitchen knife he can find out of the knife block before turning towards me with the biggest, most evil-looking grin on his face. I turn, run out of the kitchen and slam the door behind me, leaning on it to prevent him from getting through. That's when the little bastard starts stabbing the door, or at least that's what it sounded like, and it wasn't the thicket of wood, so I squeal in fear and hold my body away from the door while leaning on the door handle. I had to hold that door shut for like a full half hour while we proceeded to absolutely trash the kitchen. I could hear plates breaking, glasses smashing, all kinds of chaos going on behind the door. I called the parents with the intention of telling them they had to come home immediately, but they actually just patched my calls. I was left alone, to basically barricade myself inside the living room for the remaining few hours of the night. When the parents got back, they went mental and refused to pay me for my services. They basically blamed me for his shocking behavior and swore blind that they'd be telling everyone what a horrible babysitter I was. I cried all the way home. Luckily, the calls didn't dry up, and I actually talked to one family who said they completely sympathized with what had happened, knowing full well what a nightmare child that little brat could be. So that's the scariest time I ever had babysitting, and I implore you, if you're getting into it, be very careful who you choose to babysit for. Non-payment could have been the best possible outcome to that night, as I might not even be here to be able to tell this story. Back when I was 17, I used to babysit for our neighbor, who at the time was a single mother going through a particularly nasty divorce. She had 2 young sons, one of whom was 8 years old, while the other was only around 18 months. They were absolutely adorable and very well-behaved kids, but you could tell that they were going through a lot, and the older one definitely showed signs of stress over the whole thing. I'll never forget the time he asked me why his daddy couldn't live with them anymore, and it honestly broke my heart. Not because I didn't have an answer for him, but because hearing it would have just been too much to bear, too much for anyone to bear. Anyway, after a few months of her being alone, she finally decided to get back on the old dating horse. I was so happy for her. After such a rough time, she deserved to find happiness again, to find someone who had the wherewithal to be a real father to those 2 adorable little boys. So one night she leaves on her date and says she'll be back around midnight, not a moment later. Only she doesn't tell me exactly where she's going, and I have no way to contact her because this was back in the 80s, and no one had a cell phone. Well, they did exist, but not in the available commercial sense. It was all landlines back then. Otherwise, this might not have gone the way it did. On the night in question, I'm chilling on the couch, absent-mindedly flicking through the TV channels. I had put the kids to bed an hour ago, and they're sleeping like rocks, and everything seems fine and dandy. When suddenly there's a knock at the front door. I wasn't expecting anyone, but then again it wasn't my house, so I felt kind of obligated to answer and take a message or whatever. Only as I start walking down the hallway towards the front door, whoever is on the other side starts banging against it and cursing up a storm. "Cheryl, I know you're in there. Open the goddamn door." Not exactly what was said, but I'm not keen on repeating some of the words they used. It was really, really harsh. So I'm just frozen, looking at the door in total fright, when the oldest boy comes flying out of his room and down the stairs, running to the door and yelling, "Daddy's home!" I grab him and pull him away from the door. I had no idea what this guy's intentions were, and after all, they were probably divorced for a damned good reason. But I almost fainted with fear when I heard the words, "I got my shotgun in my truck, and tonight, I'm gonna teach you a goddamn lesson you'll never forget." He screams this, then I hear his footsteps moving up the gravel path. It appeared he wasn't bluffing at all, and if that was the case, then our lives were clearly in danger. I grab both kids and run out the back door and across the street to my house, where my mom calls the police. When the police arrive a few minutes later, they actually find the ex-husband taking a massive dump on Cheryl's porch. He gets arrested, and I wait with the kids at my house for their mom to show up. Everyone was in tears by that point, even my mom, who is normally a pretty reserved woman. I mean, maybe he was just having a manic episode and no one was in real danger, but honestly, it was one of the most terrifying nights of my entire life.